Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Just our quick standard disclaimer, this presentation is for educational purposes only. It's not legal advice, and it does not create an attorney-client relationship on its own. We'll have some information at the end on contacting us if you have specific questions. Let's go over the agenda real quick. We're going to talk about having an employee handbook, being aware of some law changes, and then because it's Valentine's Day, we're going to talk about showing love to your employee handbook by updating it regularly. We will talk about the employee handbook acknowledgement, and then we will give some additional information on how we can assist you. Now, starting out, really, this is a topic, if you've listened to us before, you may have heard us speak on, but it is definitely worth repeating because it is such an important issue for employers. All employers need to have an employee handbook. It doesn't matter if you have 2 employees or 200 employees. All employers need to have an employee handbook. And why do you need to have an employee handbook? Well, it's a roadmap for the employees of the employer-employee relationship. In other words, it is a way to centralize the most important human resources and employment law related policies for your employees in one place. It explains your rules and expectations, and also keep in mind that it's not just for the employees, but it's also for the employer to talk about sort of the give and take between the employers and the employees. Another reason to have an employee handbook is that it demonstrates you as an employer's knowledge and compliance with laws. A better handbook is going to have necessary policies in it. You're not going to have extraneous information you don't need, and the better employee handbook you have, the more protection you have for your company from risk, as it shows that you're aware of the laws that are out there that are subject to your, or that your business is subject to, and that you're going to comply with those laws. Again, we've sort of touched on this, but it's a very important document to protect your business in the event of an employee claim. If somebody goes to a state agency or federal agency, like the State Department of Human Rights or the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, they say, hey, I've got an issue at work with discrimination, harassment, I've got a wage and hour claim, something like that. If there's any sort of activity or claim that goes against your company, the first thing that the other side is going to ask for is your employee handbook. They're going to want to see it. They're going to want to see what's in it. They're going to want to see what's not in it. But a well-drafted employee handbook focusing on important compliance policies, again, things like harassment, discrimination, wage and hour, paid leave, if you're in a paid leave state. Having all those pieces in place in your employee handbook greatly helps reduce risk for your organization for some of the instances shown on this slide, because it shows that you are aware of your obligations. In thinking about why you want to show your employee handbook some love, you've got to consider changes in law that need to be a part of an employee handbook. There's a lot of things that have been happening, and on some of our other webinars, we've discussed some of these topics, but it's worth from a high level revisiting these again because they are so important. There are changes happening all the time, especially recently at the federal level, and there are also changes at the state level, and then in some cases local level, regarding content that's going to go into your employee handbook. So what am I talking about? Well, one of the areas that is rapidly changing in many different geographical areas of the country is protected classes. One of the areas that is being added outside of the traditional ones of age, religion, race, national origin, one of the new ones that's being added are protections for natural hairstyles. The laws that are being passed are known as Crown Acts, and they prohibit discrimination as noted based on natural hairstyles. So where have laws changed in that area recently? Well, if you have any employees in Arkansas, if you have employees in Minnesota or Texas, they have added new protected classes relating to the Crown Act. There's also a lot of changes going on with gender specifics and gender classifications in different states. Minnesota, Michigan, New York have added new information that if you have a handbook that hasn't been updated since those laws changes, that is information that would be important to have in your document. Another big area that's occurring is with paid sick leave. So some states already have paid sick leave laws in place. They've been effective for a while, but some changes have occurred to existing paid leave laws that need to be updated in an employee handbook. So like the state of California, Colorado, Illinois, those 3 states with existing paid leave laws have made updates to them. There are also new paid sick leave laws in Maine and Minnesota that if you have employees in those states and you haven't updated your handbook to include that information, that's something that you would need to do in terms of having an update to cover those areas. Paid family leave is an area of the law that's been fairly hot. A lot of states in the last few years have adopted paid family leave laws. Most recently, the state of Minnesota added a paid family leave law. That's something that would need to be in an employee handbook update if you have employees in Minnesota. And also changes are occurring to existing paid family leave laws as well, sort of like what we were talking about with the paid sick leave laws. There's an evolution of more changes to existing paid family leave laws, such as in the state of New York or out in Oregon. Pregnancy and nursing accommodation, those are big areas that are changing. That could affect your employee handbook in terms of content. So if you have employees in Minnesota, if you have employees in New Hampshire, there's information that would need to be updated for those states. The other reason that we're talking about showing love and paying attention to your employee handbook is something we've discussed before, but it's such a big change, it's worth mentioning again, and that is the Stericycle Incorporated decision that came out last year from the National Labor Relations Board. It greatly affects employee handbooks, and I'll just kind of give a high-level overview of how. For example, your provisions limiting employee speech are now extremely limited, as well as provisions regulating employee conduct or behavior. If something relates to like civility rules in a handbook, that can't be in there really anymore because of the Stericycle decision. If you've got a ban, a complete ban on any use of cell phone cameras at your workplace for taking pictures, videos, and sound recording, you should not have that in your handbook anymore. If you've got a policy that bans speech on if you challenge publicly the company's reputation or you challenge publicly the company's integrity, that type of policy would no longer be allowed. You also can't have a provision stating that an employee must keep any information about, say, a harassment investigation or harassment complaints confidential. That would be in violation of what the National Labor Relations Board has said with the Stericycle decision. So all of these items on this slide kind of show the rapidly evolving state of the law on a lot of critical issues for employers overall, but then specifically with your employee handbook, these are areas that would need to be updated if you are operating in any of the locations where these laws have been changing. And an employer is best served and best protected if you have an up-to-date employee handbook. So, as we're discussing, love your employee handbook. Show your employee handbook some love. Well, how do you do that? One of the best ways to take care of that is to do an update of your employee handbook annually. You know, just getting an employee handbook, number one, is a super important step, as we talked about at the beginning of this discussion. But once you have it, you still need to pay attention to your employee handbook and show some love and attention to the document. don't let it just sit there unattended for the next 15 years. We've seen clients that have literally put a handbook in place, let's just say late in the 20th century, so late 90s, and didn't do anything with it since then. We've seen clients that have handbooks that are 12 years old, 15 years old, 5 years old even. You're getting into an area where you're just creating liability for your company with that old employee handbook. You're not helping by having that document in place. With those older handbooks, I can say with the ones that I've seen, they all contained outdated and then maybe in some cases blatantly illegal at this point in time language. So it's not worth having an old, outdated employee handbook. The remedy for that, again, show some love. Regular updates for an employee handbook are very, very important. Just so many laws are changing, as we had just discussed. Federal laws, state laws, local laws. If you put a handbook in place and you're doing the regular updates, there's going to be a lot of benefits for you as an employer. It's going to show your awareness of the compliance obligations of your company. You're going to have the most up-to-date anti-harassment information. You're going to have the most up-to-date anti-discrimination information. You'll have information on wage and hour laws that may change, on all of the gender stuff that's happening. You will have updated information on that. Having an updated employee handbook also informs your employees of those changes. Again, you can't just sit on a 5, 10, 15-year-old handbook. That's going to probably cause more harm than good. If you put a new handbook in place, it goes out to the employees, it lets them know about these new law changes, and it's also a great opportunity for you as an employer to remind and refresh your employees on what the rules are and what laws your company is following and what they need to follow as employees. What are their obligations? Now, once you've taken that step of putting your updated handbook into place, you're aware of all the law changes, you've worked to get the handbook updated, maybe with us, and you're moving on to getting it out to your employees, preferably on an annual basis. Then you want to make sure that the employees acknowledge that new document. Many employee handbooks, if you think back to the days on paper, they had a physical form that the employee signed acknowledging that they had received the handbook. So anytime you're making a change with the handbook, it should be redistributed to the employees. The employees need to sign and acknowledge the updated employee handbook. This is very important. The language in the acknowledgement would be something like, for the employee, I hereby acknowledge that I have been made aware that XYZ company has an employee handbook, and a copy of that handbook in either electronic or paper form has been provided to me for review. I acknowledge that I understand it is my responsibility to read the handbook and familiarize myself with the policies contained in it. I agree to comply with all the policies and procedures applicable to my position. I can bring questions about the handbook to human resources, the VP of operations, whoever. Have some language in there as well. I further understand that the employee handbook is not an employment contract and that the company can make changes to the handbook as needed. So that's just kind of some a general verbal recitation of what an employee handbook acknowledgement generally covers. But why have this? Why is it so important? Well, one is it helps you avoid disputes. An acknowledgement form can show that you have provided the document to the employees, and it's now on the employees to be familiar with and abide by the rules. It's written evidence or electronic evidence that you have followed the process with creating an employee handbook, distributing it to the employees. This is especially important if you've got like a disciplinary dispute or rule dispute with an employee. If you have a signed acknowledgement, you've got a piece of evidence of their knowledge of your rules and policies. Again, it shows your legal compliance as an employer, that you've gotten this stuff out to the employees. They are aware of the rules and obligations. And it can also be useful with future company policy development. as you may get some feedback when people are going to sign or about to sign. They might say, hey, what about this? It's a way to have a back and forth with an employee, get some information from them on thoughts they have and maybe something that needs to be addressed. With the signing of the employee handbook, it can be done on paper, as we just mentioned, although maybe that is more rare these days, but that's certainly acceptable to do so. A more common thing that we're seeing now is that there's an electronic signature that is provided by employees, and it's done through a human resources information system, or HRIS. If a company has like an employee portal where they can do time entry, they can ask for PTO. There may also be a section in there that covers work documents, and you can set up in many HRISs an employee handbook with an acknowledgement system. You want to just make sure you've got a copy, either paper or electronic, that the employee signed off on the employee handbook. Now, what if an employee refuses to sign an employee handbook? They're not going to, or I should say the acknowledgement. They're say, I'm not going to sign this acknowledgement. You could create a note in the employee's personnel file, something along the lines of, employee John Doe received the employee handbook on XYZ date, but refused to sign the acknowledgement form. That's fine. If somebody refuses to sign, you just want to have a note of that somewhere. In addition, some employers make the signing of an employee handbook acknowledgement a condition of employment. In other words, they say, if you want to work for us, you have to sign off on this. If you do not sign off on this, then you will not be able to work for us. That's just kind of an overview, but it is a very, very important piece that with your handbook that you've updated and shown some love to, that you want to have the employee handbook acknowledgement in place as well, ideally signed by each employee. If you need some help with your employee handbook, if you're our client, we do provide our best practices document with our standard Ask HR service. We are a reliable partner for our business clients, and we are here to assist you. Next week, by the way, joint employer ruling staffing agency is going to be our My HR Minute. That is a big topic that's percolating up, and sign up for that, please. You'll find some great information on there. I want to say thanks to everyone for listening today. We really appreciate your time, and we will catch you next time around with our next My HR Minute. Thank you.